Castlevania is a franchise that you may have heard of in some shape or form over the years. Maybe you have played one of the many games in the franchise, or you have watched the animated series on Netflix. However you know Castlevania though, you cannot deny that the series has had a major impact on gaming, especially with its contribution to the creation of the Metroidvania genre, leading to many incredible games to be released, such as Ori and the Blind Forest and Hollow Knight. My experience with the Castlevania series mostly stems from me playing the DS games such as Portrait of Ruin and Dawn of Sorrow. With that being said though, I do however have a bit of experience playing the first Castlevania game. When I was a kid, my dad worked as an electronic technician, and he would occasionally get me hand-me-downs of old devices from customers who just simply didn't want them anymore. Those devices included video game consoles. Looking for a way to keep me entertained while also not wanting to spend money, he would give me those old consoles, which led me to growing up with games that were definitely not of my generation. So pretty much while everyone else was having fun playing Ratchet & Clank and Jak and Daxter for the PlayStation 2, I was still stuck in the 80s with the Nintendo Entertainment System playing golf. Yep, that sure is golf. That said, I still was happy playing the NES, and one of the first games I owned for the console was the first Castlevania. And man, I remember first booting that game up, playing through it for a little bit, and absolutely fucking hating it. That shit was hard, dude. Since then, I have always wanted to go back and finish the first Castlevania game, and then I thought, hey, while we're at it, why don't we go finish the entire NES trilogy as well? So without further ado, let's go do that, shall we? Castlevania was created by Hitoshi Akamatsu, who directed the first 3 Castlevania games for the Famicom and the Nintendo Entertainment System. But despite being the man who created Castlevania though, not much is actually known about Akamatsu since he has pretty much slipped under the radar after the release of Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. In fact, trying to look up any information about him, you'll quickly find out that there really isn't that much information about him, considering that he has only done one interview and most of the information that you can find about the man is spoken from people who used to work with him. Hell, it was even hard to find out who even created Castlevania in the first place, since back in the day Japanese developers were credited under aliases in an attempt to reduce the possibilities of rival companies headhunting for developers. One thing's for sure though, Akamatsu was an avid fan of film. Many of the monsters in the first game are pretty much taken from Western media, and the main character of the first game's weapon of choice, the whip, being inspired by Indiana Jones. Castlevania was then released on the 26th of September 1986 in Japan under the name Akamajo Dracula, and then was later released on the 1st of May 1987 in North America. For this video, I'll be focusing on the first 3 games for the Nintendo Entertainment System, and I'll be playing them through the Castlevania Anniversary Collection for the PC, starting off with the game simply titled Castlevania. In Castlevania, you play as Simon Belmont, a descendant of the Belmont clan, who are a clan of vampire hunters who are tasked with the duty of killing Dracula. Prior to the game's events, Simon's ancestor defeated Dracula 100 years ago, but since then he has suddenly reappeared. So, as a member of the Belmont clan, Simon comes to Dracula's castle to defeat him. Before we talk about the gameplay itself, I'd like to mention that one of the first things in Castlevania that stood out to me was how good the soundtrack is, especially the song that plays during the first level and how it really hypes you up for the road up ahead. Castlevania has 6 levels you have to traverse before you reach Dracula, all of them including a boss at the end that you need to kill and collect an orb from that once picked up will complete the level. On your journey to defeat Dracula, you are equipped with your trusty whip, which is later named the Vampire Killer, that you can upgrade twice through finding whip upgrades that increases its damage and length. Throughout the levels, you also pick up these hearts, which unlike other games where hearts replenish your health, in Castlevania, hearts are used as ammo for your side weapons. Side weapons such as throwing knives, crosses, holy water, and other things like that. Aside from side weapons and whip upgrades, you can also pick up these rosaries that kills everything on the screen, as well as the double shot and triple shot power-up, which allows you to spam your side weapons 2 or 3 times in a row, which is especially great for certain boss battles when combined with the holy water. You can get all of these items either whipping candles, which some have their own designated item that they drop, but sometimes you can get these items through random drops from enemies. Two of the most useful side weapons that you can pick up, though, in my opinion, are both the stopwatch and holy water. The stopwatch allows you to stop time for a few seconds, which causes all enemies aside from bosses to freeze, which makes traversing areas with loads of enemies a lot easier. And the holy water, when thrown, not only deals a good amount of damage, but the main benefit of it is that it's really good for stun locking bosses into place, especially if you have the double or triple shot power-up. Though, I don't know whether this is just a glitch that is only in the Castlevania Anniversary Collection or not, but if you throw the holy water when there are a lot of enemies and you also have the triple shot power-up, the game kinda sometimes does... yeah, that. Traversing Dracula's castle is obviously no easy feat, with so many different monsters that can easily lead you to your death. You also, just like many other games, have 3 lives in total, and once you have ran out of all of them, rather than starting back at a checkpoint, instead you have to start all the way back at the start of the level. One thing that you can find that really helps you out during your runs is meat that you can find behind the castle walls, where you can usually find the location of the hidden meats by either whipping around at random walls, or the more likely way to find them is by complete accident. How long has that piece of meat been sitting there for? I don't know. But you know what? If you see a bit of mold, just scrape it off, pussy. What's the worst that could happen? Castlevania's controls are quite simple. I mean, look at this. You think there's a lot you can do with this? Of course, you have the D-pad to move around, the A button to jump, and the B button to use your whip. And to use your side weapons, you need to hold up on the D-pad and also hit the B button. One interesting thing to note about your basic whip attack is that it actually has a slight delay to it, with Simon getting ready to swing before he actually attacks. This may sound like a bad thing, but the added slight delay is actually pretty nice, because it makes it feel as if your attack has some weight to it, which makes landing hits on enemies feel more satisfying. The platforming in this game can be quite challenging compared to other platformers, and that is mainly due to the fact that you can't control Simon while in midair. To give you guys a comparison, in a lot of platformers when you make a jump, you still have the ability to move while in midair to make landing on platforms a lot easier. In Castlevania, though, once you jump, you are pretty much committed to that jump, so if you make a mistake, that's too bad, buddy. Now die! Another thing that also adds to the difficulty of the game is that whenever Simon takes a hit, he will be knocked back a fair distance, which can lead to some pretty bullshit deaths if you are near a ledge. Speaking of difficulty, though, this game is fucking hard. Like, goddamn, there's a reason why I never finished this game as a kid. The first 2 levels of the game aren't too bad, slightly challenging but still enjoyable, but once you reach the 3rd level, Jesus Christ, the difficulty just ramps up. With that said, I should probably give some background information for those who are unaware of the fact that many NES games in general are really hard due to a few reasons. One of them being that NES games were highly influenced by arcade machines, where the games were made in a way that they were very difficult but still fun to play, making it that if you wanted to continue playing after losing all of your lives, you'd have to use your hard-earned coins to jump right back in. Another reason for the high difficulty is because of hardware limitations due to most NES cartridges only being able to store up to 124 to 384 kilobytes. So in order to extend the game's playtime, many games that were made during the NES era were made to be hard as fuck. And finally, the last reason for the high difficulty in NES games is because of the rental market in the US, where some games that are more forgiving in the original Japanese release are tweaked to be harder, so you don't beat the game in a small rental period, thus giving you no need to go out and actually buy the game. The huge spike in difficulty definitely sucks, but with that said, this was pretty much just the norm back in the day. Now, as I said earlier, the 3rd level was the level that I noticed a huge spike in difficulty, and some of the reasons that makes it so difficult are from things such as cheap deaths caused by being knocked back, a section where you get bombarded by loads of enemies that are annoying to kill. Seriously, what the fuck is this? Enemies that guard the boss room that takes a lot of hits, and a boss battle where a hard-to-hit little shit bounces around the area and chips away at your health until you are dead. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, once you run out of all 3 lives in the game, instead of starting off at a checkpoint, you have to start all the way back at the start of the level to deal with all the bullshit leading up to the boss again. Oh yeah, I think it's about the right time that I mentioned that there is no way to save your progress, so if you shut off the console to go do something else, else, that would mean you'd need to start from the beginning of the game the next time you boot it up. The only way to keep your progress, though, is by leaving your console on and hoping that it doesn't combust into flames while you're out doing something else. Since I have the Anniversary Collection, though, I do have the option of saving my progress through save states whenever I needed to take a break, which is an absolute godsend because I can't imagine starting all the way back from the beginning each time I had to close the game to do something else. Of course, with each attempt that you make, though, the better you get at going through the levels, but man, the difficulty spikes can be just a bit much at times. There is one thing that really annoyed me the most about this game, and that is how enemies occasionally drop side weapons and how it automatically switches your side weapons if you walk on top of them. There were so many times in the game where I wanted to go into a boss battle with a certain side weapon, most of the time the holy water, but due to the fact that enemies can occasionally drop weapons, I would most of the time lose the weapon that I wanted to bring in because of that drop, and usually I don't have enough time to react to avoid picking up the dropped weapon. I wish that instead of picking up items automatically, I think it'd be better if you could pick up items with a simple button combination, maybe something like holding down on the D-pad and pressing B or something, I don't know. Something not automatic, cause man, this just really pissed me off. But anyway, after traversing the stages and facing many challenges and game over screens, we are finally face to face with Dracula. During this fight, he will teleport around the room whilst also shooting projectiles at you in a shotgun-like pattern, which you can take out all of his projectiles at once if you whip at the moment he shoots. He also only takes damage from blows to the face, so you also gotta focus on jumping and timing your hits right. All in all though, this fight is pretty damn simple. That is until you make it to his second phase, where he turns into a giant bat. Unlike the first phase where he teleports around, in this phase he leaps around the level, and he also still uses his fireball attack. Also in this phase, he can be damaged no matter where you hit him, but still blows to the head are way more effective. Thankfully, if you run out of lives here, instead of having to start at the beginning of the level like previous stages, you actually start at the staircase leading up to Dracula. Which thank fuck for that, cause fuck going through everything prior just to get to the boss again, shit dude. But after a few good attempts at it, we finally managed to defeat Dracula, thus finally finishing the first Castlevania. Castlevania, despite being very challenging, was still a fun experience. Despite how much the game roughed me up, I still always had the drive to get back up and go in for another go. I also really enjoyed the music and never got bored of the soundtrack, and I also just dug the overall aesthetics of the game. Honestly, the main thing that I wish the game included was a way to go back to a certain level without having to start all the way from the beginning. That said, I was using save states to go back to stages I was already playing, but thinking from the perspective of someone playing on an actual NES without that luxury, that would be the main thing that I'd change. Now, with Castlevania all done and dusted, why don't we go ahead and move on to the second game, shall we? Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest. After the success of the first Castlevania, it was clear that a sequel had to be made. And so, a year after the first Castlevania was released, that is exactly what happened, with the game titled Castlevania 2: Simon's Quest, which was released to mixed reviews and is said to be the worst out of the NES trilogy. One of the reasons for the mixed reviews may have to do with the fact that Simon's Quest, just like a few NES sequels at the time, tried to do something different and strayed away from the first game's genre, where instead of being an action platformer, Simon's Quest goes down a more non-linear RPG route, where the game is more focused on exploration rather than trying to go from point A to point B. But is Simon's Quest really all that bad, or did people just not like it because it was not what they were expecting? With an open mind, why don't we go ahead and find out, shall we? Set 7 years after the events of the first Castlevania, you once again play as Simon Belmont, who during his fight with Dracula was inflicted with a dark curse. The only way to undo the curse placed upon him is by gathering all 5 pieces of Dracula's body and then going back to Dracula's castle to burn them. As soon as you start the game, you are instantly dropped in the town of Jova, where the start of your adventure begins. It is quite easy to not know where to go or what to do in Simon's Quest, so one of the ways that you can get an idea of what you need to do is by visiting towns. Towns are basically safe havens free from the threat of monsters, most of which have a church that you can go to be healed, merchants that will sell you things such as weapons, garlic that looks like a nutsack, and other helpful items. Believe me guys, the garlic nutsack is very helpful. And of course, you can talk to the local townspeople for information to give you hints on what you should do next. take my daughter, please? What the fuck? One thing to keep in mind though when taking information from the townspeople is that not everything they say is true, since they will either provide you with helpful information or they could be straight up bullshitting. Just like the first Castlevania, hearts once again are exchanged to use your side weapons, but in this game they also act as currency as well as experience points that level you up. Leveling up, increasing your max HP. As you guys can already see, this game is very different from the first Castlevania. But don't worry, you still have your action platforming stages that instead take the form of mansions. Pieces of Dracula's body are located in 5 different mansions that you need to find and explore, where at the end of the mansion you will find an orb containing one of Dracula's body parts. Finding the mansions can be no easy task though, since some of them are hidden from you unless you solve a puzzle, and some even require you to have a key item to be able to explore the mansion itself. One of the mansions requires you to drop your garlic nutsack in front of this dude for him to take you to it, so yeah. See, I told you the garlic nutsack was helpful. Once you have made your way to near the end of the mansion, you will eventually come across an old man selling an oak stake, which is used to break the orb at the end of the mansion containing Dracula's body part. If you don't have the oak stake when you get to the end of the mansion, you unfortunately won't be able to progress since there is no other way to get the body part. One of the things I don't like about the mansions though is that they have these fake floors that you can fall through if you walk in them, which is pretty annoying because they look exactly like a normal floor, and once you fall through, you have to walk all the way back to where you were before, jump over the fake floor and hope you don't fall through another one, which most likely you probably will. Then you repeat this cycle until you have made it successfully to where you are supposed to be. So basically, this is just a cheap way to extend playtime. One cool thing about collecting Dracula's body parts is that some have a secondary use to them when equipped. For example, equipping Dracula's rib gives you a shield which repels projectiles, while equipping Dracula's eye lets you see hidden clues that can help you figure out what you need to do. Unfortunately though, there is one pretty big problem with Simon's Quest that does make the game quite a bit harder, and that is that the dialogue is poorly translated in the English release. Quite a few times I have been confused by what the townspeople are trying to say because some of the things they say don't really make much sense. For example, one of the first hints that you encounter in the first town is, "A crooked trader is offering bum deals in this town." Now, you may be wondering, what did he mean by that? Fucked if I know, don't look at me. It turns out what he was meant to say was, "In the town there are sellers who do business in hiding." Which you will find out later in other towns in seemingly empty houses, you can find merchants that are hiding underground. The poor translations are really frustrating because it can make it pretty hard to tell what advice some of the townspeople are supposed to be giving out, but that said, even with the bad translations, I did manage to figure out most of the puzzles on my own, but still, for a game that pretty much relies on getting hints on what to do through dialogue, it would make complete sense to actually translate the game properly. One of the things that made Simon's Quest unique at the time was that it had a day and night cycle. While playing through the game, a message will pop up with the words, "What a horrible night to have a curse." The screen will then fade to black and then night begins. Towns that were once safe havens start to spawn enemies, all buildings including churches are locked so there's no way to heal, and enemies outside of town are now a bit stronger. Your options are now pretty limited, so the only thing you can really do is try to survive the night. After a few minutes have passed, a message will eventually pop up saying, "The morning sun has vanquished the horrible night," signaling that the night is over and we can now actually do things without getting thrashed by monsters. I personally thought that the system was pretty cool at first because it made me feel like there was some sort of danger to be worried about, especially when I'm traveling outside of town. But after a while, it just becomes kind of an annoyance since you can't really do much at night, especially if you are in town where pretty much the only thing you can do is sit around killing zombies to pass the time. All hail the mighty Nutsack, slayer of all monsters that oppose it! Of course, this isn't a Castlevania game without you dying a lot, and the cost of you running out of lives this time around is losing all of your hearts and experience points. Which isn't really much of a loss since gathering hearts isn't that hard to do, and leveling is just something that just happens for me and not something I really paid attention to or cared about. I won't lie though, the mansions do feel pretty underwhelming when compared to the first game, and that's mainly because there's barely any challenge. Yeah, you will still die a lot in the mansions, but there are not really any downsides from getting a game over, especially since you just respawn wherever you got a game over instead of being sent straight back to the start of the level, so basically there is no fear of losing any progress to make you more careful about dying. Another thing that's different about Simon's Quest compared to the first game is that there are not many boss battles. In fact, in total, there are only 3 boss battles in the game, 2 of which are guarding pieces of Dracula's body, while the third and final boss is Dracula himself. I just want to quickly say though that for monsters that are tasked with guarding Dracula's body, they aren't very good at it considering you can just walk past them, grab the body part and leave. With that said though, you do actually need to kill the mask, and that is because she drops the cross, which is important since it is used to gain access to the final area of the game. I personally like the direction that Simon's Quest decided to go in for their gameplay. I mean, yes, it is different, but I still had a lot of fun with it, even if it just needs a bit more polishing. Honestly, the biggest problem I had with this game is how hard it can be to figure out certain puzzles, mostly due to the badly translated hints, but also some of the puzzles can be a bit ridiculous. One of the most ridiculous puzzles that I came across was after a quick platforming section, you reach what seems to be a dead end. After inspecting the dead end, I assumed there was nothing that needed to be done here, so I ended up just wandering around aimlessly for ages trying to find a way to progress. After a while, I eventually gave up and just googled the answer, and it turns out what you're supposed to do here is you have to walk up to the wall, kneel down next to it for 10 seconds, and then a tornado will come and cast you away. How in the hell are you supposed to figure that out? Out of pure curiosity, I decided to search up how people managed to solve a lot of the puzzles in the game, and one common answer that I found was that they found the answer through Nintendo Power, which was a video game news and strategy magazine that ran from 1988 to, surprisingly, 2012. But fuck that, we have the internet now, so let's just Google the answers. Once you have collected all pieces of Dracula's body, as well as the cross to gain access to Dracula's castle, we can now face off with Dracula once more. Which damn, Dracula looks a little bit more intimidating in Simon's Quest compared to the first game, and the way he just stands there is just a little bit unsettling. That said, he is way easier to kill this time around. Just throw a bunch of knives at him and you're pretty much golden. Castlevania 2 Simon's Quest? Done. This is where we find out that Simon's Quest also features 3 different endings depending on how many in-game days have passed. The longer you take to beat the game, the more likely you are to get the bad ending, while the faster you beat the game, the more likely you are to get the good ending. I got the bad ending, which results in Simon dying along with Dracula, which I'm okay with. I beat the game, that's good enough for me, let's move on. Simon's Quest was an interesting experience. The game had a lot of cool ideas in it that would later be polished up and used in future games of the series, but compared to the first game, Simon's Quest felt pretty underwhelming to me, especially in terms of challenge, at least in the action platforming aspect, as well as the fact that you can easily get stuck with not really great ways to lead you into the right direction due to the mistranslations was pretty damn annoying. I guess you could say that the game is challenging, except basically for the wrong reason. Simon's Quest is nowhere near a bad game though, I just think that it's okay. With all that being said, let's move on to the final game of this video, shall we? Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse. 2 years after the release of Simon's Quest, the third and final Castlevania game for the NES was released. That game being Castlevania 3 Dracula's Curse, which is not only the game that the animated series is based on, but it is also the last Castlevania game that was directed by Akamatsu. Compared to the first 2 games, Castlevania 3's narrative is a lot more in your face this time around, with the whole opening sequence styled with a film-esque vibe to it. The gist of the story is that Dracula is using sorcery to create a bad world filled with evil. The good people of Europe tried to fight him back but failed, so a member of the Belmont family was summoned to defeat Dracula. The Belmont who we play as for this game being Trevor Belmont. Dracula's Curse returns back to the action platforming gameplay that the first game was known for. And man, right away, the jumping quality compared to both the first and second game is insane. The visuals are such a huge step up from the previous games, especially with the small details like the thunder strikes in the background, the fog, the way the water pours on top of your character when you go under it, and my god, the animations are hella smooth. We also can't forget about the sound design, cause goddamn everything just sounds so good, and the soundtrack is by far my favorite out of the 3 games, with many of the songs just being straight up bangers. The boss battles in this game were also pretty fun, some even have their own unique ways of taking them out. For example, one way to deal extra damage towards the Cyclops boss is by trying to throw your dagger at the same time lightning strikes, which, if timed correctly, can lead you to dealing some major damage. One of the coolest boss battles in this game, in my opinion, is when you fight against Death. At first, his fight is pretty normal, where he just flies around the stage throwing his scythes at you. Pretty much like how his fight was in the first game. That is until you get to the second part of his fight, and he turns into this. And man, seeing this for the first time actually struck genuine fear into my heart, like damn. One new feature in Dracula's Curse that sets it apart from previous games though is that you not only play as Trevor, but you also play as 3 other characters as well. You first have Cypher Bernardes, who is a sorceress who has access to powerful spells, but takes extra damage and has weak physical attacks. You also have Alucard, the son of Dracula, whose regular attack is shooting fireballs that you can upgrade it to shoot in 3 different directions. And he also has the ability to turn into a bat in exchange for hearts, which makes navigating through the levels a lot easier. His main drawbacks though is that turning into a bat consumes a fuck ton of hearts real fast, and also because he is taller, he is way easier to get hit. Finally, the last character that you can meet is Grant Dynasty. Grant is pretty much the most agile character in the game, with the ability to be able to climb walls, but his main thing is that he is able to be controlled while in midair, which makes platforming way easier. He is also known to be one of the most forgotten characters of the Castlevania series, considering he barely gets any mention in future games, and is pretty much left out of the animated series. How sad. Anyway, personally I stuck with Cypher since although she is physically weaker than the other characters, she is really great to use during boss battles since her spells deal a lot of damage. Especially when she whips out the bowls. Those bowls are pretty powerful. Cypher Bernardes, you know she's ballin'. How you meet these characters is that when you complete certain stages, you are given the choice to go either 2 different pathways that would eventually lead you to meeting a certain character after defeating a boss, which you can choose whether you want to bring them along with you or not. You can only take 1 character with you though, so if you already have someone traveling with you, you can either stick with them or you can replace them. Whoever you end up taking with you will also affect the ending you get once you finish the game. One small thing I personally found annoying about switching characters though is how long it takes for you to switch. To switch characters, all you have to do is hit the select button, and the game takes a couple of seconds with a transitioning animation to change characters. Which I know that doesn't sound too bad, but after a while I just started getting impatient and would have much rather a quick switch rather than wait through a short animation every time I wanted to switch characters. With Castlevania 3's return to the action platforming gameplay of the first game, so do they return to the difficulty. Except this time they bump the difficulty up like crazy. Like, no, seriously, this game is crazy hard with a lot of bullshit enemy placement, so many areas where it's near impossible not to take a hit, and to top it all off, enemies start to deal more damage the later you get into the game. Unfortunately, in case you were wondering, the health bars are shared, so you can't simply change characters if one of them are running low on health, which honestly would have been nice considering how fucked up this game gets with its difficulty. Thankfully though, if you were playing this game back in the day, the game does have a password system where you can go back to whatever level you were at previously without having to replay the entire game again, but still, fuck, this game took so long for me to finish because of the excessive difficulty. One of the most annoying things about this game, though, is just staircases in general. And one of the reasons for that is because of the button combination for using your side weapons. To go up the stairs, you need to hold up on the D-pad, and to use your side weapons, you also need to hold up and press A. There were so many times while playing the game where I wanted to use my side weapon, but because both the controls for using your side weapon and using the stairs requires you to hold up on the D-pad, if I was near a set of stairs, which is a lot of times might I add, if I tried to use my side weapon, the game would instead make me use the stairs, which most of the time results in me taking unnecessary damage. Another annoying thing about the stairs and side weapons in this game is that for some reason using side weapons in this game can sometimes be impossible on stairs. I don't know, for some reason when you try to use side weapons on stairs, sometimes it decides to work, and then other times, or should I say most of the time, it just doesn't. When I started playing these games, I made it a point that I'd only use the save state feature to only save my progress and not use it for things such as save when I had good items, or save before the boss room so I didn't have to traverse the level again to get back to them. Which, yes, I did stand by that condition for all 3 games, until halfway through Dracula's Curse, because it was just pissing me off that bad. Like, dear God. Like, honestly, I probably wouldn't have a problem with the difficulty if the enemy's damage didn't go up as you progress, because the amount of damage that they deal by the end of the game is insane. After a few levels later, we finally make it to Dracula's castle, which, I won't lie, entering the castle and hearing this song from the first stage of the first Castlevania was a really nice throwback. But after defeating Death and traversing another set of bullshit, we finally make it to Dracula once more. Dracula first starts off by moving around the area while trapping you in this cage of fire, where you have to dodge the fire spikes sprouting from the middle, which is not that hard to do. In his second phase, he turns into this set of heads that spill out blood that damages you, and once you defeat that, he goes into his third and final phase where he turns into a buff bird wearing a top hat that shoots lasers at you. This battle is pretty damn hard considering that there are 3 phases you have to go through, and unfortunately if you do die, you don't actually respawn back at the staircases leading up to Dracula like in the first game, and if you get a game over, you have to start all the way back at the start of the level. So, I'm save stating this bitch. But after a long and hard battle and a lot of loaded saves, we finally managed to defeat Dracula, and the world is saved! Or something. Yeah. Castlevania 3, despite its major difficulty, was still an incredible game. I love the music, the graphics, the gameplay, and the fact that you can play more than one character with their own different playstyles was very nice. Admittedly though, the difficulty did get to me a few times, and honestly I can't imagine playing through this game without save states, cause goddamn this game is brutal. But anyway, that wraps up Castlevania 3, Dracula's Curse. The NES trilogy of games was a wild yet fun ride. I won't lie, there were loads of difficulties along the way, but I'm glad to have pushed through and was able to get past them all. Out of the 3 games I've played today, hands down my favorite out of all of them was Dracula's Curse, cause although it didn't hold back in terms of difficulty, I was still in love with the gameplay that I found myself wanting to go back to it every time the game kicked me down. With that all being said, thank you all for watching the video. I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye-bye.
So dance, while I put you in a trance. Let's party. Boogie in your body. Want that body, make sure you don't